So after overcoming all of those problems which we never had, I'm glad to finally start. And I'll be presenting today an interesting modern topic in the modern web, which is called CSS-in-JS. And a little bit about myself. My name is Nick. This is how you can get in touch. I'm as of recently a consultant and a freelancer. I'm also a family man, and you can follow me in all sorts of ways if you care. And so I'll start with a disclaimer. And I love CSS, okay? I know only one person in person who knows CSS for sure better than me. And that's very unfortunate.
Your wife?
No, she knows lots of things, but not CSS. This is not a what CSS sucks, lol, let's not use it talk. And I've worked on all sorts of projects in my web development career, which is almost a decade. I've done content sites and third-party widgets hosted on other sites, and client-side applications, and various constellations of all of the above. And the purpose of this talk is to make people consider new practices. It is not a calling to replace CSS. We'll get back to that. So what actually I'm going to talk about? I'll show a few, two examples of CSS ecosystem failures. I'll talk about why it's like that. I'll talk about the very long history of CSS-in-JS. It's been like 3 years, which is like 30 years in normal time. I will show the correlation of CSS-in-JS to the evolution of modern HTML authoring. I will show how CSS-in-JS solves lots of the CSS ecosystem deficiencies and issues. I will show what else can CSS-in-JS do, which you cannot do today, and you couldn't have imagined up until recently, and a few examples of popular CSS-in-JS libraries. So let's start. And this is not intimidating at all. So the trouble with CSS is actually not what is pictured here. Or rather, the main trouble with CSS is not this. So two examples. Example number one. I need a CSS reset or normalize. Okay, I have a plan. I'm going to start a new project. I'm going to start writing CSS. And you start writing CSS by adding a CSS reset or normalize, because the contents of user agent styles is not something which is standardized. I want to do whatever, and then I'm going to profit. Sounds like a solid plan, doesn't it?
Very.
So this is where it gets complicated. We will replace the question marks with our first approach. We use a simple link style sheet with an href to a CDN resource to a style sheet with the CSS reset. But it's not that good because it means we have another request. And it's not an actual package that I manage with version control. I can't self-host it, okay? I have to have two different URLs for the minified and the development versions, right? There's got to be a better way. Another option is you copy-paste it into your CSS, right? But then it's also crap. You're going to have a bad time. It's not version managed, you can't upgrade it, you know, that's not the way to go. And the last option, which is the current standard, is you use complex tooling to achieve something which is fundamentally so basic, okay? So you can use tools like Webpack and all sorts of loaders and NPM packages, but you hit a roadblock on every step of the way. You have to configure a lot of tooling. You have to search for packages. Some of them are in different languages, so you can't just import them easily and get started. And this is the very first step in, I actually want to write CSS, okay? Why is that so? And the reason is that CSS workflow is stuck in document mode. It is not modular, it is not interoperable, it is not scopable, and optimizations are something that you have to work hard for. They're not built in. I mostly agree with this quote, and this is where a second example comes in. I want to reuse styling of an existing component from another runtime, okay? It's all JavaScript. This is a friend of mine asking for help, and his expertise is not front-end, and I wanted to help. He works for Red Hat and is a smart guy, and he uses Bootstrap, I think, and he just wanted to use a different, the same component from a different runtime. So this is another quote, which is unfortunately true. And don't read this, don't go into the details, it's just bad advice, okay? There's no easy way to do this basic thing. So just like the recent election, not so recent, in the United States, you have a good idea. I want to reuse something that is already written. I want to have to use styles, okay? You get a bad implementation. And this was my advice, okay? I wish I could tell him something better to do.
So this is to like prompt.
Yeah. So this is very unfortunate, and it's very frustrating, like you see in this picture here. Why can't we easily reuse CSS? Modern CSS frameworks aren't interoperable. Each is like a country. It has its own language, concepts, conventions. It supports different browser versions, different layout techniques, it results in incompatible monoliths, negating basic software development best practices, code sharing, modularity, reuse, and huge variance in how the same features are implemented. As an example, take something like ClearFix. You have several ways of doing that, but you can't just use one. There's one in Bootstrap where you put a class. There's one in Foundation. If you're using Sass, then you have a mix-in. You can't just solve a simple problem like that easily in CSS. Now, all of this, those were two examples. Those are, all of those are, they're old news, okay? So you see this newspaper, it's from 1958. You can see that in the corner here. Okay, the climate is really getting warmer, unlike what Trump thinks. Directly from the documentation of Fella, a CSS-in-JS library, who here has seen this image of this slide, the plan? Anyone? Okay, we're not going to read this, but it outlines the problems with CSS, and these are the details. So in November 2014, Christopher Shadow, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who was working on React and React Native at Facebook, gave a thought-provoking talk called CSS-in-JS. He outlined the problems of CSS at scale and later showed how they solved those at Facebook. They were able to solve most, but in return had to add a lot of additional tooling. They didn't solve all. Then he introduced a complete new approach to handle those issues without any actual extra work, using inline styles. It seemed crazy, but it worked magically. And as you can imagine, inline styles, what are we in 1996? It created shockwaves and turmoil and a lot of conversations in the front-end community. So CSS people and HTML and JavaScript people and designers, there was a lot of noise. So examples of well-known people from those communities. Is this a joke? Threw up in my throat a little. Never do this. Don't repeat mistakes from the past. Worst web dev idea of all time, or just really a bad one. So many things to avoid writing CSS. Okay? And oh, this worked faster on my computer because it was cached.
Because it was Linux.
True. Oh, here we go. Okay. So this is the evolution. The background here is the evolution of web development. As you can see, it's very simple, trivial. Different browsers and standards. So people are very emotional about best practices because they are there with good reason. Okay, people went through a lot of pain to use the tooling that they know because it works for them. It solved those problems. But times are changing, and yesterday's best practices stopped being best because they failed to serve their purpose because the purpose has changed. Okay? And although this is how the World Wide Web, the information superhighway, I don't know if you remember that expression, this is how it looked like back in the 90s. It needed a separation of concerns which looked like this. Pretty sure all of you are familiar with this. You have HTML, which is content. Above that you have CSS, presentation, and above that you have JavaScript, which is behavioral or whatever you call it. But today we live in a world of web components. And this is the documentation of material design in the background. And you can't see all of it. Maybe I can click it. Yeah, there's a lot of it. Okay, it's components. It's not a single page. It's fundamentally different to how it used to be 10 years ago. This work? Okay. So a modern separation of concerns looks differently. Okay. A modern separation of concerns is components or widgets. Okay, they are basically features. You have a feature of a modal dialog. You have a feature of a button. You have a feature of a, I don't know, a form. And it's not just a form. It's a form that, I don't know, contact me. And this is what works today for most applications. And this is how evolution looks like. So CSS-in-JS today is catching up with a whole decade of HTML-in-JS evolution. And if that term is not familiar to you, then I beg to differ. Remember jQuery plugins? 10 years ago, okay, you can do this. This is a widget. This thing generates HTML, okay, binds events, sometimes injects some JavaScript into your web page. And actually, the previous background slide is not how evolution looks like. That's the result of evolution. This is more of how evolution looks like. There's lots of experimentation. There's lots of dead ends. Okay, we try and we mostly fail. But in the end, we get to somewhere better. So we experimented a lot to get to where we are today. And here's another example. Remember stuff like Backbone? Okay. This right here is literally HTML in JS. Okay? And nowadays, we have a variation of that, which is also HTML in JS. We just don't call it that. We call it components. Okay? Does anyone recognize this show? It's from my childhood.
Yeah.
It was an awesome show, and they were running experiments and teaching science. So we're running experiments now, resulting in CSS-in-JS fatigue, if you've missed JavaScript fatigue. But that's actually a very good thing, because we acknowledge CSS's shortcomings in the modern web. And smart people are coming up with new approaches and new ways to tackle these old issues in new ways. This is how smart people experimenting looks like. So, the premise of CSS-in-JS isn't just catching up to the modern front end. We have that. We have that today. So, instead of global namespace and lack of isolation and non-deterministic resolution, you get scoped styles, not as a best practice, which one must enforce using naming conventions like BEM and SMAX and object-oriented CSS. It's not something that you have to police and say, hey, you didn't name this uniquely. It's there by default. You get it for free from the runtime. You don't even think about it. Lack of dependency management and interoperability. It's just JavaScript. So you can use standard tooling, modules, and NPM, and whatever. Sharing values between CSS and JavaScript. You could never easily do that. And here you have that built in by definition. But the real premise of CSS-in-JS is reimagining what's possible compared to just CSS. And that is stuff like optimizations and static analysis. You can have dead code elimination. You could never do that with CSS. You can have testing and code coverage with CSS. You can do critical CSS inlining. So stuff that's above the fold will be there. Not everything, and not nothing, and not a guesswork of, I think this will be visible, but you know that for sure because the runtime gives you that. Even smarter optimizations. So if you have HTML in JS and CSS in JS, you get a super minification with name mangling. You don't care about the class names at all. They are generated. So you can have them super short and mangled like you had with JavaScript minification for years. You can have stuff like Webpack's Commons chunk plugin, which means if I have a bunch of CSS for one page, unique, and a bunch of CSS for another page, and you have a common bunch of CSS which is used for both things like CSS reset and normalize, then you can programmatically extract that into a third file and load that. And you don't need to think about it like you do now to optimize. You can have standard libraries instead of the current CSS silos, okay? Think stuff from SaaS land. You have packages. You can have a standard library for CSS. You want a clear fix, you just import it, and you can use that. And you can import it from a variety of runtimes. You can have CSS component packages, which you don't have now. You have silos. So that's standardization, modularity, and code reuse. But that's not all. So there's more. Are you ready for the next best thing since sliced bread? This is it. Non-browser styling. Okay, so Vlad showed before me React Native Style Sheet API. But you can build on top of that, and you have lots of projects which do. You have React Native for web, React primitives, you have Microsoft, and other companies like Airbnb and PayPal, all working to create a true cross-platform styling language. It's the premise of Java. Write once, run anywhere. Okay, you can now, today, write styling, which will work the same way for web, iOS, and Android. Yoga is a cross-platform layout engine for a variety of languages, which also Vlad mentioned, which is in use today, for example, in React Native. And you have crazy stuff, which you couldn't have imagined a few years ago, like custom renderers. Stuff like React SketchUp, which renders React components inside Sketch, so you can collaborate with your designers way, way better, and in a way which nobody could even think of a few years ago. So let's have a quick look at a few examples of CSS-in-JS libraries. CSS modules. This is the most popular one. It gives you, basically, you author your styles in the exact same way. And you don't need to think about the global namespace because the runtime removes that for you. It generates random class names. So you import what you wrote, and then you put it into your HTML. You can do that dynamically in your components. And what's lacking from this slide is and I apologize for that, is the result. So the resulting class names are these. They are mangled these. They are basically randomized versions of these. So there's JSS. It's a fast JavaScript CSS compiler in client and server side. It's compatible with React and other libraries. It's non-opinionated. It's small and extensible via plugins. So you can have stuff like, auto prefixer and all of the post CSS plugins and optimizations. You have most of those in all of the CSS-in-JS libraries because it's just JavaScript and you can operate on it. And so you have a bunch of imports and a bit of setup, but then you write, it's a pen, so it's upside down. Basically, you create your styling using, in this case, plain old JavaScript objects. You have all the CSS stuff like pseudo classes and media queries. But you also have things like this, which is just JavaScript, okay? And you can rely on packages which you import to manipulate your JavaScript, okay? Server and client. And then you just render it. Easy. You have stuff like styled components. This one is nice, because why would you even bother with class names? They are merely an implementation detail. What you care about in CSS are the properties and their values. You don't care about selectors. You just want to style stuff, okay? So you can do that. Basically, you import this element, h1, okay, which is a tagged template ES6 function, which receives a bunch of, just a string, basically, of CSS. And what you get back is a component, okay? And then you just use it. You no longer care about selectors. They don't exist. You don't care about specificity. And you have the full power of a general-purpose programming language called JavaScript to do whatever you wish with styling. You can compose and extend and modify in any way you would normally do with JavaScript, okay? Using whatever data structures and flow you wish. Another example is Aphrodite. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Basically, this one uses an object, JavaScript objects syntax, and it's basically the same idea. So you have a class which is title, or it's not a class. It's actually a property because again we don't care about classes. We care about styling, and then you just call it like this for a class name, and it's generated for you. You don't care what's written there. You only care about styling. And I won't show an example of usage of Styletron. I'll show instead this image from their documentation. Look at the input versus output optimization that you get. You could never do that with CSS, and all of the other CSS-in-JS libraries, they output pretty verbose CSS. This one analyzes it, extracts the commonalities between the various rules, and then applies them for you. And again, you don't care about names. This is beyond competition in terms of optimizations. And this is what you can do when your HTML and CSS are both generated in JavaScript in the same ecosystem. So that was a lot of information, but what's my point? And there's good news. My point is that there's good news and there's bad news. So the good news is that it's a celebration. With so many choices, each with a variety of features and trade-offs, I have no idea which ones will become popular. I suggest you try some of these for yourself and draw your own conclusions. Okay? Maybe you care more about optimizations. Maybe you care more about composability. But I think this is the future, and I think we've seen this before. Who here knows this image from the days of ES6? This was pretty popular back in the day. The bad news is, I'll let you read this nice tweet. The bad news is CSS is here to stay, and you still have to learn it, okay? But everything surrounding it will probably change. So I love this quote, and these are the sources and my inspiration for this talk. I nearly compiled it and added a few background images. All the credit goes to these people. And I think that's it. So thank you, and stay curious.